established under Chapter 13 of the Constitution. The Commission makes recommendations and envisaged in the following sections of the Constitution. Section 214, subsection 2, which deals with the equitable shares and allocations of revenue. Section 218, subsection 2, which deals with government guarantees. Section 228, subsection 2B, which deals with any provincial taxes. Section 229, subsection 5, which deals with municipal fiscal powers. And Section 230, subsection 2, which deals with provincial loans and municipal loans. What is important here, honorable members, is that all these pieces of legislation may only be enacted after the recommendations of the Financial and Fiscal Commissions have been considered. The next slide, please. Our presentation today, honorable members, is made in terms of Section 214, subsection 1 of the Constitution, and Section 9 of the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act of 1998, as well as Section 4, subsection 4C of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act of 2009. And our theme in our submission to yourselves today is on improving service delivery and inclusivity in an environment of expenditure moderation. As a Commission, we consider that the South African economy is confronted by a series of global and domestic challenges that are weighing heavily on our public finances. These include slowing global growth, geopolitical tensions, rising inflation, high unemployment, acute power challenges, inefficiencies in state-owned enterprises, as well as climate change. Within this context, honorable members, we ask what options are available to government to improve service delivery and inclusivity. Next slide, please. To answer some of these questions, honorable members, our presentation will discuss first, the escalating global inflation. Secondly, we'll discuss the impact of state-owned entities and their sustainability, as well as the basic income grants, and as well as its sustainability as well. Thirdly, we are going to discuss issues of basic education. Primarily, we're going to review learner-teacher support materials and also learner transport in South Africa as well. And in the fourth place, we are going to look at climate change and the response of local government with regards to this. We're also going to take a deep dive and look at spatial inequalities within our municipalities and look at municipal spending in terms of local economic development. Finally, honorable members, we are going to look at municipal cost recovery and the affordability of basic services in terms of service delivery. The context between which this submission is made is now going to be unpacked by our researcher. Over to you, the next researcher, please.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning again to honorable members. So with the next few slides, we just try to give a brief context within which the submission is being tabled. And one of the things that we see when we look at South Africa's growth is that the real GDP increased for 2 consecutive quarters. That is coming from the deep decline that we experienced in 2020. So it increased by 0.4 in the first quarter of 2023 and by 0.6% in the second quarter of 2023. However, as already noted, that the combination of external and domestic risk or domestic factors continue to pose a risk to South Africa's growth. And what we see is that low growth is likely to persist and this may have a defining impact on public finances. And insofar as domestic factors, we're talking about factors such as the electricity crisis, deteriorating infrastructure, especially as it relates to logistics infrastructure. But there are other long-standing structural challenges that continue to weigh in on South Africa's growth prospects, and those too need to be addressed in the long run. Next slide. And then in this slide, we look at the budget deficit and gross debt to GDP. And what we see is that as a result of the government taking on the Eskom debt, gross debt will rise from 4.7 trillion in 2022-23 year to about 5.8 trillion. And what we see also is that the February budget had expected that the budget deficit will decrease from 4.5% of GDP in 2022/23 to 3.3% of GDP in 2025-26 financial year. However, already the indication is that this is unlikely to be achieved due to the low revenue collection as a result of falling commodity prices. And what we also note is that it is important to highlight that the reduction of the budget deficit needs also to be supported by economic growth, also at the same time maintaining a prudent fiscal stance, and also directing resources towards growth enhancing expenditures such as infrastructure, but also trying to fight issues such as crime and corruption, which result in fiscal leakages, which are then weigh in on economic growth. Next slide. And then in this slide, we look at inflation, and what we see is that inflation, although inflation is gradually being brought under control, inflation increased to 4.6 in August from 4.7 in July. But it's still the lowest reading since the July 22, when inflation rate was at 7.8. And again, here what we see that the Reserve Bank, of course, has increased interest rates in an effort to try and stabilize prices. However, we note that the increases in interest rates will increase South Africa's debt servicing cost, and this requires policymakers to strike a balance between growing debt in the face of rising inflation. But more importantly, as it relates to the issue of inflation, is that there is a need to have a coordination between monetary policy stances and fiscal policy stances insofar as the fight against inflation, because part of what is driving inflation is administered prices, which are a fiscal policy function. So that coordination would then assist in trying to bring inflation under control. Next slide. And then here we look at unemployment, and what we see is that the official unemployment rate decreased to 32.6, and the expanded unemployment rate also decreased to 40.1%. However, we know that there are long-standing structural challenges that continue not only to impact on growth, but they also undermine progress in reducing poverty and unemployment and inequality. So addressing these long-standing structural challenges will not only assist in growing the economy, but they will assist also in addressing issues of unemployment, and also addressing labor structural issues that will also aid the fight against unemployment. Next slide. And then from here, I will hand over to Thando, who will then take us through the first two chapters, and he will then hand over to other members of the team. Thank you so much. Over to you, Thando.
Thank you, Siyanda. Good morning again, Chairperson and honorable members and all colleagues who are present in the platform. I will be taking you through the first two chapters of the presentation. with chapter 1 and chapter 2. So starting with chapter 1, chapter 1, we were looking at escalating global inflation, the sources, spillovers, and fiscal sustainability. So as the honorable members will recall, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on global inflation. So what we saw was that there was a decrease initially in inflation, but as the economy started to recover and lockdown measures were eased, inflation then began to rise. And the war in Ukraine and the renewed pandemic outbreaks exacerbated the situation, as we know, and we saw that they fueled inflation globally. By early 22, for instance, inflation had reached its highest level in several years, and this occurred in a context where many countries were already facing significant debt vulnerabilities even before the pandemic hit. So with that kind of context in mind, then we start off our preface to the chapter by noting that governments across the globe provided stimulus packages during COVID-19, causing increased deficits and debt, as I've already alluded to. Consequently, an imbalanced recovery ensued that was characterized by high debt, uncertain inflation, and external risks. So what we saw then was rising prices, supply chain disruptions, and uncertainty about the Russia-Ukraine war, sustained inflationary pressures. So this chapter, therefore, aims to examine international inflation and its impact on South African economy and public debt. Next slide. So in this slide, we then begin to unpack our findings with regards to this chapter. And this one slide is really on the effects of inflation on inequality and poverty. So there are three things that we want to highlight with regards to this slide. Firstly, that high inflation can negatively affect society, particularly when you consider households with limited assets. What it does, it erodes the value of savings, and then it pushes more people into poverty and worsen inequality. Secondly, those that are wealthy, we see that they have more assets than liabilities, and during this time of high inflation, they tend to lose wealth, and during this time they tend to lose part of their wealth. And on the other hand, those who had significant debt during this time, they benefit from inflation because the real value of their debt decreases. But the situation is different with poor households, those who have few assets. They do not benefit at all from high inflation because of limited savings. They have limited savings to begin with. Next slide. So continuing with our findings, in this slide, we're looking at inflation and public debt dynamics. And what we want to note is that when there is a sudden increase in inflation, it causes the amount of debt of a country to also increase quickly. So what happens is that high inflations, this happens because high inflation means high interest rates, making borrowing money more expensive. However, over time, inflation can actually help reduce the amount of debt because it makes the money owed worth less in real term. This is especially true for long-term debt. But it's important to remember that this relief is only temporary, and the amount of debt compared to the country's income can start rising again in the future. Next slide. So this slide, we continue to look at public debt and growth dynamics. And what we want to note is that during COVID-19 pandemic, people were concerned about how increased government debt affects the economy. So our research then tells us that when a country debt increases a lot, it can cause a decrease in its economic output. This effect is temporal, like I've already alluded to, and the economy will recover over time. When a country has a high or increasing debt compared to its income, its economic growth is negatively affected. However, if the government is able to generate more money than it spends, it results in what we call a primary surplus, which can actually help the economy grow. So in the South African context, what we're saying is that having a primary surplus will increase economic growth. Next slide. This slides then we speak to the recommendation that flows from the findings that we've already spoken to. So there are two main recommendations that come from this chapter. So the first one, we are recommending that National Treasury institute a sustainable fiscal consolidation exercise to reduce debt by cutting spending and increasing revenue. And this should be done by aiming for a primary surplus to promote growth and to ensure fiscal stability. In this regard, transparency, efficient spending, better debt management are also important. Secondly, we are recommending that National Treasury, in conjunction with the Department of Social Development, collaborate to create a social security program that safeguards vulnerable groups affected by inflation, such as energy, fuel, and food prices. But in the meantime, while that is in the works, we're saying that they should work to overcome the barriers to accessing existing social protection measures, particularly those that pertain to the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. Next slide. So now moving to chapter 2 of the presentation. This chapter is broadly divided into two parts. The first part evaluates South Africa's major SOEs, their role in economic development, and their impact on fiscal sustainability. It also assesses potential reforms for these SOEs. The second part examines fiscal feasibility of implementing a basic income grant program in South Africa by evaluating its costs and the country's ability to absorb them over time. So what we want to highlight is that the fiscal feasibility of a basic income grant program is directly related to the assessment of SOEs. SOEs have a substantial impact on the country's fiscal resources. So if SOEs are draining financial resources or operating at a loss, it may affect the government's ability to fund social welfare programs such as the basic income grant. Therefore, understanding the financial health of SOE becomes crucial in determining the fiscal capacity to implement and sustain a basic income grant program. So with that in mind, then we make 2 points. The first, that SOEs pose fiscal risk to government due to financial losses and reliance on government support. Secondly, implementing a basic income grant program in South Africa could reduce poverty, unemployment, and inequality while stimulating economic growth. Next slide. So in this slide, then we're looking at issues as they pertain to SOE's governance and some of the financial issues thereof. We make the point that the appointment of the new electricity minister in South Africa could potentially lead to conflicts with other entities with similar responsibilities. And we're saying that this could result in inefficiencies and delays and potentially worsen the existing crisis in the electricity sector. Secondly, we're saying that exempting Eskom and Transnet from certain financial regulations raises the risk of financial mismanagement, corruption, and other misconduct. This could result in significant financial losses for government, potentially requiring large amounts of money to cover these losses. And therefore, we are saying establishing proper oversight and accountability mechanisms to prevent this risk from materializing becomes very crucial. And lastly, on the financial aspect of things, we want to note that over the past 12 years, government has provided a total of 162 billion to financially distressed SOEs, with the majority of the funds amounting to 82% going to Eskom. This highlights the significant financial burden that troubled SOEs have placed on government. Next slide. So this slide then deals with Eskom financial and operational performance. So the graph that you see on this slide represents Eskom financial performance from 2017 to 2022. However, the analysis has been updated to reflect the latest development. So financially, we see that Eskom has faced challenges. Its net asset value initially decreased, but later recovered. However, its liabilities steadily increased over the period. So Eskom, as a result of that, has consistently reported substantial net losses, with a peak of 20.9 billion in 2019 and remaining above 18 billion in 2021. The projected net loss for 2022 was 9.1 billion, but the actual loss turned out to be higher at 12.3 billion. Operationally, also, we see that Eskom is really struggling because it has experienced a decline in performance metrics. The electricity available factor, for instance, which measures the availability of electricity supply, has decreased significantly over the past decade. Additionally, there has been a notable increase in the unplanned loss factor, indicating a higher frequency of unexpected losses in generating capacity. Most importantly, we want to highlight the fact that load shedding has significantly worsened, reaching unprecedented levels in recent years. From 2020 to 2022, there was a substantial increase in both the frequency and the severity of load shedding. In December 22, for instance, the country experienced the highest amount of load shedding ever recorded, as Eskom had to implement stage 6 load shedding, indicating a severe strain on the power supply. The situation has not improved in 2023, as we all know. In fact, the amount of load shedding experienced in the first half of 2023 has already exceeded the total load shedding for the entire year of 2022. This highlights the ongoing challenges faced by Eskom in meeting electricity demand. Next slide. So this slide, we're now looking at Transnet financial and operational performance. So what we want to bring to the attention of honorable members is that Transnet's financial performance as well, if you consider the years 2017 to 2022, as presented in the graph, indicates poor health. In 2022, Transnet managed to generate a profit of 5 billion. However, their financial situation was unfavorable in 2021, and they incurred a net loss of 8.4 billion and experienced a decrease in net value from 143 million to 129 million. Secondly, we see that Transnet, just like Eskom, is facing difficulties when it comes to its operations. For instance, meeting its coal and iron ore export targets in 2020, they have struggled to meet its coal and iron ore export targets in 2021. This is due to various issues such as tripler breakdown, derailments, locomotive shortage, and temporary closure of a railway bridge. Also, we want to note that Transnet also significantly decreased general freight volumes measured by the 20 foot equivalent units, the TEUs, transported by freight rail, and the number of imported and exported cars in 2020 and 2021. So these declines were influenced by factors such as derailment, theft, locomotive malfunctionings, port impediments, and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So we see that both these two major SOEs, Eskom and Transnet, are really struggling financially and operationally. Next slide. So in this next slide, we're looking at government guarantees and exposure to SOEs between 2019, 2020 and 21-22. Let me apologize about the topic there. It's not supposed to be Transnet. It's supposed to be government guarantees as presented in the table there. So the table reveals that government has a significant level of exposure to SOEs. In particular, government support for Eskom has increased from 6.2% of GDP in 2019-20 to 6.3% in 2020-21. This suggests that government provides financial assistance or guarantees to Eskom to ensure its stability or operations. We also want to note that the total guarantees government provides to all SOEs have also increased. In 2019-20, the government's total guarantees to SOEs amounted to 12.2% of GDP, which rose to 12.4% in 2021-22. This indicates that government is assuming considerable level of financial risk by backing the debts or obligations of these state-owned entities. And then lastly, we want to note that the conditions attached to these government guarantees are not always clear. And the reasons for seeking these guarantees include poor SOE governance, inappropriate business models, policy uncertainty, and costly policy decisions made over the past decade. These factors have contributed to the need for government intervention and support to ensure the stability and functioning of SOEs. Next slide. So in these slides, we're looking at sources of fiscal risk from SOEs. There are three main points that we want to make with regards to these slides. Firstly, that governments often impose public policy objectives on SOEs without providing enough resources, leading to financial challenges. Secondly, that regulators prioritize profits and short-term budget needs over optimal investment and financing plans. And then lastly, that excessive resource extraction and preferential financing create distorted incentives and information imbalances, resulting in financial crisis and limited control over SOEs. Next slide. So in this slide, then we begin the second part of this chapter, which now is dealing with the basic income grant. We want to note that the graph that you see on this picture displays social grant expenditure by province and grant type. So what we see from the graph is that the older person's grant and the child support grant make up the majority of grant spending by provincial governments. What we see is that KwaZulu-Natal has the highest social grant allocation, spending over 42 billion in the 2020 and 21 financial year. Conversely, the Northern Cape received the smallest amount with only 5 billion spent during the same period. Next slide. So in this slide, we're showing the SRD grant applicants by age distribution. So the data presented in the graph indicates that a significant number of individuals between the ages of 20 and 35 have applied for the COVID SRD grant. The age group accounts for the highest percentage of applicants, representing over half of the total applications. The data also reveals that there is a considerable number of applicants between the ages of 36 and 49, comprising approximately a quarter of the total applications. Individuals aged 50 and 59 comprise a smaller portion of the application pool, accounting for only 12% of the total application. So this distribution of applicants by age highlights the need for income support measures in the current economic situation. So the high number of applications from young adults suggests that there is a significant level of joblessness and poverty among this demographic group. Therefore, it is crucial to implement targeted support programs that address young people's specific challenges to alleviate their financial hardship and improve their overall well-being. Next slide. So in this slide, we're looking at the SRD grant applicants by province and education level. The data presented in this graph reveals important insight about the SRD grant applicants in South Africa. Firstly, we see that the provinces of KZN and Gauteng have the highest number of applicants, indicating significant demand for income support in these provinces. This suggests that these provinces may have higher unemployment or economic challenges than the other provinces. Secondly, what the data is telling us is that the applicants with grade 10 and grade 12 education level constitutes the largest portion of applicants. This indicates that individuals with basic education qualifications are facing significant financial hardship and are in need of income support. This could be attributed to a lack of employment opportunities or limited access to higher education or vocational training. The graph also highlights a concerning trend of declining SRD grant applications in the year 2022-23. And this decline resulted in savings for the Department of Social Development, suggesting that fewer individuals were able to meet the eligibility requirement or to navigate the administrative process for applying for the grant. Then this, to us, this raises questions about the effectiveness and accessibility of the system and the potential hurdles citizens face when seeking assistance. Next slide. So in this slide, we are showing consolidated revenue and social assistance spending over time. The data presented in the graph provides insights into the relationship between consolidated revenue and social assistance spending in South Africa. So one of the key observations that coming from this graph is that consolidated budget revenue has grown faster than social assistance spending since 2021-22 financial year. This suggests that there has been a focus on fiscal austerity measures resulting in limited increases in social assistance spending. The graph also tells us that 2023-24 fiscal year, the budget presents challenges in expanding the social assistance budget to include the basic income grant in the medium term. The anticipated spending in this area remains relatively constant, indicating lack of available resources for significant increases. This raises the important question, therefore, of how to approach the implementation of the basic income grant. Government must therefore clarify whether the basic income grant should be integrated into the existing social grant network, or if its universality implies replacing all current grants with and establishing a new social grant system. The decision has significant implications for the structure and effectiveness of social assistance programs in addressing poverty and inequality. Next slide. So in this slide, we're looking at the progressivity of personal income tax. The data presented in the graph provides insight into the distribution of taxable personal income and its implication for the progressive nature of personal income taxes. The graph reveals that there is a bimodality in tax revenue distribution within the 750,000 to 1 million and 1 million to 1.5 million tax bracket groups. This means that there are two distinct tax revenue peaks or concentration within this income ranges. This bimodality suggests that the distribution of taxable personal income is not evenly spread across these tax brackets. Instead, sections of the population contribute a larger share of the tax revenue, while others contribute a smaller share. This has implications for the progressive nature of personal income tax. Progressive taxation is designed to ensure that individuals with higher incomes pay a higher proportion of their income in taxes. However, the bimodality in tax revenue distribution raises concern about the effectiveness of this progressive taxation system. It indicates that revenue is more concentrated in certain sections of the population, potentially indicating income disparities and unequal wealth distribution. This raises questions about the fairness and equity of the tax system. Next slide. So this slide is just a continuation of the analysis that we talked about in the previous slide. So the analysis in the previous slide points us to two key conclusions. The first conclusion is with regards to the decline in tax morality. So the decline in tax compliance within the group that we're talking about, the 750,000 to 1 million and the 1 million to 1.5 tax bracket group, it indicates a decrease in these individuals' willingness to fulfill their tax obligations. This could be attributed to various factors such as perceived unfairness of the tax system, lack of trust in government, or the presence of tax evasion practices. It raises concern about the overall tax morale and the effectiveness of tax enforcement measures. The second conclusion relates to struggles to enter the upper middle income class. So we see that individuals face difficulties moving up the income ladder and reaching the upper middle income class. As a result, their income levels remain within the certain threshold that leads to lower income tax payments. This could indicate challenges in economic growth, limited opportunities for upward mobility, or potential gaps in income reporting and tax compliance. These conclusions highlight the implication of an uneven and non-progressive distribution of income taxes. So we see that if personal income taxes were used to finance the basic income grant, it will disproportionately burden the middle income group. This suggests that therefore the need for progressive personal income tax reforms to ensure a fair and equitable distribution of tax burdens and to address potential inequalities within the tax system. Next slide. So this slide then starts to deal with the recommendations emanating from our findings in this chapter. So with regards to SOEs, we are recommending that National Treasury should collaborate with SOEs, parent departments, to reduce fiscal risk from quasi-fiscal activities and avoid policies that create such burdens. Secondly, National Treasury should collaborate with SOEs, parent departments, to prevent excessive resource extraction that can harm the competitiveness of SOEs. And National Treasury should establish safeguards to prevent SOEs from becoming too indebted and reduce fiscal risk associated with SOEs borrowing. And National Treasury, in partnership with SOEs, parent departments, should mandate the implementation of effective system to monitor budget execution and require detailed reports from SOEs. And then lastly, National Treasury should introduce reforms to improve the transparency of SOEs operations. Next slide. So with regards to the recommendation as they relate to the basic income grant, there are three recommendations that we're making. The first one being that the ministers of Social Development and Finance should reassess COVID-19 relief grants amount by considering the cost of living and unemployment. Secondly, we're saying that we're recommending that the Minister of Social Development and the South African Social Security Agency should explain the underspending of 1.8 billion and 3.7 billion in the adjustment appropriation bill and second adjustment appropriation bill. And then lastly, that the Minister of Social Development should create a policy tool that connects access to social and economic opportunities, such as the expanded public works program. Chairperson, with your permission, let me hand over to my colleague, Gianna, who will take us through the next two chapters of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Thando, and good morning again to the Honourable Chairperson and members on the platform. I'll take you through chapters 3 and 4 of the FFC submission, with chapter 3 dealing with a review of learner-teacher support materials as well as learner transport in South Africa. The government has a legal obligation to ensure that all learners have access to required learner-teacher support materials, also referred to as LTSM, which includes textbooks, stationery, worksheets, etc. And a failure to do so is in contravention of the right to basic education. As well as this, in addition to this, the court has also found that the transport for learners who live far from school or who cannot afford the cost of transport must also be provided at the state's expense. So the aim of this chapter is to review the provision of LTSM and learner transport in South Africa, with a particular focus on the policy environment, the regulatory regime, as well as funding and delivery. A big issue here is that the main cost driver in basic education sector is personnel, with on average 75% of spending being allocated in respect of the compensation of employees. Given the rigidity of provincial revenue bases, provinces have to reorient spending towards the most pressing spending needs. For schools that are unable to supplement government spending with revenue from school fees, this essentially means less funding for essential and complementary educational inputs, such as LTSM and learner transport. Next slide, please. So in terms of the regulatory environment, the LTMS policy was introduced in 2014 for public comment. However, this policy is still in draft form. So finalization of this policy process is really critical to signal a policy priority attached to the provision of LTSM. However, the FFC does note that there is one gap in the policy as it is currently formulated, and that is that the LTSM can be strengthened in this policy. Furthermore, the results from the chapter illustrate that funding is not linked to the changing needs of learners that in different grades. So, of course, as learners progress to higher grades, there's an increase in the number of textbooks and length of textbooks required, and this implies greater costs. However, we do not see the funding being differentiated to the needs of the learners. Currently, the funding is via the quintile base per learner amount that's regulated by the National Treasury, National Norms and Standards of School Funding Policy. But as stated, this doesn't distinguish between relatively more my apologies. This funding instrument distinguishes between the relatively more funding the poorer learners. However, this differentiating in the funding, we do not see this differentiated in the funding based on grade or stage of learning. The provision of LTSM is, of course, central to addressing the challenges that South Africa faces in terms of reading for meaning. Recent 2023 statistics indicate that 82% of grade 4 learners cannot read for meaning. This is, of course, a huge challenge. And the chapter finds that this is really strengthening LTSM is really central to overcoming this challenge. Furthermore, in terms of strengthening and monitoring and evaluation of LTSM, the chapter calls for the national sphere to strengthen oversight over provincial education departments in relation to the provision of LTSM coverage, and similarly for provincial education departments to conduct oversight over schools. And this could require an electronic monitoring system. Next slide, please. So moving across to the learner transport findings. While the demand for learner transport has significantly increased between 2014 and 2022, what the chapter finds is that there's an inconsistency with respect to the actual number of learners that qualify for learner transport, as reported by the National Department of Transport and reported by the National Department of Basic Education. So we see a gap with respect to the budget and expenditure data on learner transport. The available data and reported on budget and spending for learner transport programs, in some cases, is not disaggregated, but is reported under goods and services. Some of the key drivers of growth in demand for learner transport include schools' rationalization program, This is particularly in rural provinces, as well as new human settlement developments, which is predominantly in urban provinces. What the chapter also reveals is that the total number of learners qualifying for learner transport are, in most cases, far above the number being targeted, while the number of learners actually benefiting from the program is always above the number of learners targeted. So this points to a difference between the number of learners being targeted and those actually benefiting. And what this leads to, or alludes to and suggests, is that those benefiting are accommodated through overloads, which is in contravention of safety regulations and, of course, compromises the lives of learners. So this really indicates that learner transport funding is inadequate. Next slide, please. Moving on to the recommendations for the part of the chapter that deals with learner-teacher support materials. Firstly, the Commission recommends that the Minister must ensure that the draft LTSM policy, which has been stalled since 2014, is finalized and approved. Secondly, funding for LTSM should be prioritized, especially for quintiles 1, 2, and 3 schools. National funding norms need to be developed to guide spending on LTSM per child, as well as per phase or grade of education that they're in. This includes, for instance, foundation, intermediate, senior, and FET. Moreover, specific priority should be given to the provision of LTSM for learners with special educational needs, as the chapter found that this was also lacking. Thirdly, LTSMs are critical in improving reading for meaning. The Minister of Basic Education must fund a national program that is aimed at improving reading for meaning and which is uniformly implemented across the 9 provinces. Lessons from successful local initiatives must be drawn on to determine which approaches are likely to succeed. And finally, in respect of LTSM, to aid improved monitoring and oversight, particularly in the realm of textbooks, to achieve the goal of universal coverage, the Commission recommends that the Minister of Basic Education expand the modules contained in the South African School Administration and Management System to include LTSM. Next slide, please. And then the recommendations of Chapter 3 with respect to transport, apologies, it should say with respect to transport at the top there. In the first instance, it is recommended that the national and provincial departments of transport should improve data collection and reporting and ensure that accurate data on learner transport, including annual demand and expenditure, is reported and made publicly available through annual reports to strengthen the reliability of the data. Infrastructure delivery, in the second case, should be planned holistically and coordinated to ensure that, where possible, the need for learner transport is kept to a minimum, particularly in areas experiencing an inward migration of learners. This would require coordination between the various infrastructure delivery programs, such as human settlements and school infrastructure. The third recommendation for this chapter relating to learner transport is that the national and provincial treasuries, in consultation with provincial departments of transport and basic education, should develop a new funding model for learner transport. Such a model must include flexibilities for provinces to address emergency contracts to provide learner transport. And then finally, the Commission recommends that the provincial departments responsible for learner transports should develop systems to verify the number of learners transported through the learner transport program on an annual basis. And this would be to ensure that annual changes are captured and well accounted for. Thank you very much. Over to the next chapter, Chapter 4. Chapter 4 deals with assessing climate change responses at the local government level. So as we know, in South Africa, we are not Climate change, my apologies, also impacts us in South Africa to unprecedented levels as we see increasing disasters such as extreme floods and droughts. And the overarching aim of this chapter is to assess how responsive the local government level is to addressing climate change and finding climate change solutions to mitigate these devastating consequences of climate change. So the more specific objectives of this chapter is firstly to consider whether municipal plans and budgets are climate responsive and sensitive to climate change, and secondly, to recommend possible strategies that local municipalities and governments can adopt to integrate climate change projects and budgets at the local government level. Next slide, please. In order to meet its international as well as its national commitments concerning climate change, South Africa does have various legislations, policies, and institutional frameworks in place. However, what this chapter emphasizes is that translating those commitments into climate change initiatives and targets on the ground remain very weak. The literature and the case study in the chapter indicate that municipalities, while they are aware of climate change as well as its impacts and the need to develop climate change responses, municipalities fail to integrate this within their plans, their funding, and they also fail to monitor and evaluate climate activities. Some of the reasons driving these failures to implement climate change responsiveness include difficulty in understanding the concept of climate change science, a lack of technical skills and capacity, as well as funding constraints. The analysis into some municipalities' integrated development plans that were reviewed in the chapter indicates glaring gaps in actioning, implementing, and prioritizing climate change responses by municipalities. And some of the reasons here are, again, lack of skills, plans that need to be approved by council, follow-up measures and evaluation of existing plans, and lack of dedicated units responsible for climate change. Next slide, please. Then moving on to the next findings on the responsiveness of local government to climate change. Budget analysis was conducted where the expenditure of each municipality for environmental protection was compared to the overall expenditure on municipal programs. And this was assessed to indicate the extent to which the budget at the local government level prioritizes climate action responses. And what the findings in the chapter reveal is that minimal of the budget in relation to the total budget is geared towards climate change's responses. We found an insignificant amount of 1% of the total overall expenditure being prioritized for these purposes. Furthermore, the literature does emphasize that proper infrastructure maintenance plays a significant role in addressing climate change impacts, especially through investing in climate resilient infrastructure in the renewable energy sector, as well as wastewater treatment. Furthermore, the National Treasury advises that municipalities spend at least 8% of their budgets on repairs and maintenance of infrastructure. However, what the chapter found was that municipalities spend far less than this proportion of their budget on infrastructure maintenance, also indicating a lack of responsiveness to climate change at the local government level. Finally, on the next slide, we get to the recommendations. There are 4 recommendations in this chapter. The Commission recommends that the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, as well as cooperative governments and traditional affairs, should spearhead integration, coordination and implementation of climate change responses so that it is in line with the national agenda on transitioning to a low carbon and resilient economy. Secondly, the Commission recommends that the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, as well as the Presidential Climate Commission, monitor, evaluate, and report on the progress made by subnational governments in integrating climate change responses in their respective planning. Committees at the legislatures and municipal councils should exercise their oversight role by ensuring that integration, coordination, and implementation of climate responses do take effect at the local government level. Finally, National Treasury, together with COCTA and the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, should, as a starting point, revise formats for the infrastructure grant frameworks to include climate change response specification, as this will enable,
sorry, lady, sorry.
Yes, Chairperson.
I just want to check how far are you, because it's past 11. How many slides do you still have less?
Chairperson, we have two more chapters.
If you cannot summarize some of the slides, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm almost done with this chapter, and then I'll hand over to Kutso to go over the last two chapters as quickly as possible. The final recommendation of this chapter is that the Minister of Finance should create an enabling and framework, essentially to ensure that the local government budgets are climate sensitive. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Kutso to take you through the following two chapters.
Thanks, Gianni. Good morning to you, Chairperson and honorable members. So I'll be taking you through the last two chapters of our presentation. And in chapter 5, we are investigating special inequalities and the efficacy of municipal spending in driving local economic development. But by means of introduction, Chair, we know that post-1994, local government was placed at the forefront of the developmental agenda, where municipalities were envisaged to play an essential role in improving the living standards of citizens by providing basic services to communities. Furthermore, we know that municipalities are also envisaged to play a transformative role in driving local economic development by creating an enabling environment that is conducive to economic growth through, amongst other things, investing in basic infrastructure. But while some municipalities have made progress in this regard, many are still struggling to fulfill their basic service delivery mandate and have been unable to drive local economic development initiatives. And also at the forefront of this is the large spatial inequalities that exist and persist across municipalities, which also undermine the revenue generating powers that the Constitution confers on municipalities. And while municipalities are entitled to grants from the national fiscus to fund some of their operations, collecting their own revenues is also crucial for the sustainability of the municipal finance system. However, we see that municipalities' ability to raise own source revenue is under severe pressure, especially in the post-COVID-19 landscape that is characterized by high inflation, also a reduction in consumer purchasing power and weak economic growth projections. Furthermore, the fiscal consolidation efforts that were put in place also put additional strain on the intergovernmental transfer system. And in this rapidly changing economic climate, we see it necessary to reevaluate the local government fiscal framework and also investigate municipal performance of local economic development related spending. But also in doing so, it is important to take into account spatial inequalities that are prevalent across municipalities. And this is the purpose of this very chapter. Next slide, please. So on this slide, the map that we see here tells us that there are several households, most notably in municipalities that are situated in the Eastern Cape, the Northwest Province, the Limpopo Province, and KwaZulu-Natal Province, where the percentage of poor households exceeds 70%. And in these regions, the prevalence of low-income households translates into their inability to pay for municipal services, and thus negatively impacting revenues through the constrained collection of service charges or foregoing revenue by providing free basic services to communities. However, the main point that we want to express here is that municipal categorization and the large spatial inequalities impact the municipalities' transfer dependency. For example, the own income of metropolitan municipalities makes up the bulk of its operating budget at 87.82%, while that of local municipalities local municipalities rely on transfers and subsidies to fund approximately a quarter of their operating budgets. However, this aggregate figure for the category B municipalities or local municipalities is somehow distorted and does not capture the disparities across different types of municipalities, of local municipalities. And this then puts the assumption of the 75%-25 split between own revenue and transfers as per the white paper on local government into question. Thank you. Next slide, please. What we are saying on this slide is that it should be of great concern to policymakers how municipalities spend their money given the core service delivery mandate and the critical development role that is bestowed upon municipalities by the Constitution. The research found that in terms of expenditure, there's an unhealthy balance between core and non-core spending priorities across elected local municipalities, which undermines the core basic service delivery mandate of municipalities. For example, we found that 37% of the total expenditure for the Steve Tshwete municipality in Mpumalanga employee costs, and 29% are towards bulk purchases, while 43% of total expenditure for the Joe Morolong municipality are employee costs, and only 5% goes towards bulk purchases. And this is concerning as it compromises the delivery of basic services. Furthermore, we'd like to note that effective spending on infrastructure at the municipal level is crucial to support and strengthen service delivery. The National Treasury standard suggests that municipalities should spend at least 8% of the value of infrastructure assets on repairs and maintenance of those assets. And this benchmark has not been achieved, as we have found that nearly half of all municipalities spend 1% or less on repair and maintenance costs on their infrastructure assets. Next slide, please. On this slide, Chair, we analyze the impact of grant spending on local economic development by means of a regression analysis. And we found that for metropolitan municipalities, there appears to be a positive relationship between the Integrated City Development Grant, the Integrated National Electrification Program, and the National Development Partnership Grant. That is to say that raising spending on these grants will raise local economic development by 1.3%, 0.5%, and 0.7% respectively. And for category B1 municipalities, we also see that there's a positive relationship between the INEP, the MIG, where increasing spending on the INEP may raise local economic development by 0.36%, while increasing spending on the municipal infrastructure grant will lead to a mere 0.01%. And lastly, the results reveal that there's a negative and insignificant relationship for both B2 municipalities and also small towns and rural municipalities, which shows that the Integrated National Electrification Program and the Municipal Infrastructure Program both impacted local economic development negatively in this category of municipalities. And this is when these grants are underspent, which is something that has to be, or that is of great concern, considering that these grants are very important grants that could drive local economic development initiatives. Next slide, please. On this slide, we analyze the impact of local economic development on employment. And the results reveal that indeed there's a positive relationship between local economic development and employment in all the municipal categories. And as such, increase in local economic development will also raise employment. We also found that the public transport network grant and the integrated national electrification program both have a positive impact on employment, while the integrated city development grant and the national development partnership grant reduces employment. Also, this is when these grants are underspent. But overall, the message that we're trying to drive here is that when utilized efficiently and when spent to totality or close to their totality, these grants can be important drivers of local economic development while also increasing employment. Thanks. Next slide, please. In terms of recommendations for this chapter, the Commission recommends that to overcome the persistent challenges that municipalities face in the context of the rapidly changing economic environment, the Minister of COGTA and the Minister of Finance should critically review the local government fiscal framework. And we also recommend that a differentiated approach is needed to ensure the policy that policy is well tailored to overcome unique issues that individual municipalities face. And to achieve this, the fiscal framework may need to be radically rather than incrementally reconfigured. Secondly, we propose that careful attention must be given to the funding mechanism of conditional grants, and the Commission thus recommends that COGTA and National Treasury should develop an appropriate funding mechanism or funding plan in a targeted and phased approach, which enhances the capacity of municipalities to spend conditional grants effectively. Lastly, we recommend that any future framework development on local economic development should include the aspect of skills development through the revitalization of mentorship or apprenticeship programs to address the country's unskilled labor issue. Thank you. Next slide, please. Right. On this chapter, we looked at municipal cost recovery and the affordability of basic services. Chair, we have seen recently that the total debt that is owed to municipalities by households, organs of state, businesses, and other entities continues to climb. And at the end of December 2022, municipalities were owed 305.8 billion, which represented a 17% increase from 2022. This is as per reports from the National Treasury. And we have seen in many parts of the country where there were outcries when municipalities have taken it upon themselves to cut off services to households and businesses who owe them huge amounts of money. And this problem then begs the question of why municipalities are not able to fully recover costs of providing basic services. And while it may be due to the non-affordability by residents when tariffs are too high, previous studies also have shown that a culture of non-payment still persists within our communities. But in any case, the general consensus will be that rising municipal consumer debt levels pose a threat to the financial viability of municipalities and impact their ability to provide services in a sustainable manner. Thank you. Next slide, please. On this slide, we display the cost coverage ratios for the 4 trading services for the period of 2017-18 to 2019-2020. And the figure shows that the cost coverage ratio for all the services is rather low and negative for all services during the period in review. And this shows that municipalities are failing to recover the costs associated with providing these 4 services. Furthermore, the low coverage levels for electricity, water, and sanitation are somewhat concerning, given that historically municipalities have typically generated surpluses on their services, which enabled them to cross-subsidize some of their services. But the variance in cost coverage levels across municipal categories can be partly explained by the difference in revenue-raising capabilities and socioeconomic characteristics, as well as factors impacting the non-payment for municipal services. Thank you. Next slide, please. On this slide, we analyze the collection rates for category A municipalities for B1, B2, and B3, and also B4 municipalities. And the figure shows that in the financial years 2017-18 and 2018-19, average collection rates for Category A municipalities were above the 95% norm, and while collection rates for other municipalities were below the 95% norm. And this shows that there's a huge difference in the revenue collection capabilities of the big municipalities as compared to small and more rural municipalities. And this is an indication that a lot of work and systems have to be put in place to ensure that the smaller and more rural municipalities are kept afloat in order to reduce their dependence on the national fiscus. Thanks. Next slide, please. On this slide, we show the correlation between cost coverage and affordability. And we found that most of the correlation coefficients are negative, which suggests that on average, municipalities that have lower bills as a percentage of income tend to have higher cost coverage levels. However, we also see that the strength of the relationship between cost coverage and affordability across services is generally weak and in some cases negligible. Thanks. Can you move to the next slide, please? On the slide, we show the correlation between cost coverage and socioeconomic characteristics. And we find that for median income households, all the correlation coefficients are positive, which suggests that municipalities with higher median household incomes tend to have higher cost coverage levels. But also see that the correlation coefficients for GDP are also positive, which indicates that on average, municipalities with higher GDP per capita tend to have higher cost coverage levels for each service. And lastly, the relationship between unemployment and the cost coverage is negative, which suggests that municipalities with higher unemployment tend to have lower levels of cost coverage. Thank you. Can you move? Thank you. This chairperson brings us to our recommendations for this last chapter. Firstly, regarding this chapter, the Commission recommends that National Treasury, in consultation with SALGA, with COGTA and provincial departments, should urge local municipalities to apply effective revenue enhancement and credit control mechanisms and improve billing and accounting systems so as to increase payment and cost coverage levels. Secondly, the Commission would like to reiterate its previous recommendation that COGTA, in consultation with SALGA, should ensure that credit control systems of ESCOM and municipalities should be aligned by means of a memorandum of understanding, and that ESCOM should assist municipalities with credit control via electricity disconnections within areas that are supplied by ESCOM. Excuse me. Lastly, the Commission recommends that SALGA, through the ASISHO, let's say it campaign, should incorporate innovative approaches to increase awareness about the importance of paying for municipal services. And in addition to this, to using television to disseminate the message, we recommend that other forms of media, such as national and community radio stations, such as billboards and sending prompts via WhatsApp and SMSs, should be used to reach a wider audience. Last, Chairperson, the Commission recommends that National Treasury should urge municipalities to assess the affordability of the total municipal bill as part of the municipal tariff setting process. And this can be done using the tariff setting tool developed by National Treasury, which includes a component for testing the affordability of tariffs to customers. Honorable Chair, this brings us to the end of our presentation. Through you, Chair, we can hand over to Dr. Mbaba, our Chairperson, for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the researchers. Honorable members, thank you so much for this opportunity, for considering the recommendations of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. We hope that these recommendations will assist you in your oversight role, as well as in your understanding and capacity as you consider Budget 2024. On that note, Chairperson of the committee, I hand back over to you for any further questions or deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you very much for the quite productive presentation, very informative. So, members, there is if there is any engagement or questions or clarity, you have opportunity now. Hello, why is it quiet?
My hand is up, Chairperson.
I'm ready to assist you with respect to members who have raised their hands.
I have Honorable Dennis Ryder. I have Honorable Politsani. Dennis, can you proceed?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, FFC. Lots of hard work gone into that. We appreciate it. Unusual to see that Mr. Chen Singh is not presenting for you, but nonetheless, Chair, I have quite a few questions. I'm going to take a little bit of time, if that's okay. The first question just relates to the overall document. We've only received the presentation. I do know that many times you have a big supporting document that goes into more detail. I was wondering if there is one available. If it's in hard copy, it would be even more appreciated for me, being an old school. But yeah, if we can get the slightly deeper drill down, if there is one available, that'll be most appreciated. Thank you. Good. So yeah, I really liked a lot of the themes that were brought forward. The issue around the underspending on the 350 SRD grant, I think, is something that we all need to note. And as we see calls for the BIG to be implemented, and then on the other hand, see the underspending in the SRD grant that's been allocated, it does raise a real concern about, you know, what exactly the criteria are and how these are being administered. So I think that it does create a difficulty for budgeting, certainly, when Treasury has to budget for an amount, and then ultimately, once that amount is committed, one sees that there's not sufficient take-up of it, and then it gets adjusted. Now, I mean, it's been fortunate that we've had that money to spread around, perhaps, when we see the other demands that have come up for that in the current financial year and the past one. But I do think that accurate budgeting means that we need to be very aware of you know, the quantum of people that are going to need this. And the reality is that the lack of uptake on the SRD grant is not as a result of people who don't need it. It appears to be more a case of administrative issues around who qualifies and how they're able to unlock that. So I appreciated that input. There was a comment about the decline in tax morality, and I think that one needs to acknowledge that I suppose the very public outcomes of the Zondo Commission had quite a lot to do with people's demoralization in terms of the way that their tax money was being spent. And I think that would naturally lead to a reluctance to pay tax. And I suppose tax morality is one term that one could use. But in the same breath, you know, I think that we need to be extremely careful. The government needs to be extremely careful around their behavior, because if they encourage people to not pay their taxes through misspending the tax money that is paid, we face a very real problem of creating habits for people. And I think in the last chapter, there was a comment about the culture of non-payment that was created by by this government when they were still or when they were not in government, and it's become incredibly difficult to reverse that culture of non-payment. Now, if we find ourselves encouraging non-payment in tax through bad behavior, it's going to result in the same thing. So I think there's a very loud warning bell for government there. Quite some comments made about climate sensitivity, and I wonder if eco-sensitivity in terms of the ecology and the environment is not perhaps a better phrase to use these days, because as much as municipalities need to be climate sensitive, they also need to be sensitive to their actions on the ecosystems that they form part of. And certainly when one looks at the sewer spillages into the rivers, etc., and see that that's a core function of local government, where a lot of the other climate issues are perhaps slightly bigger than local government, and certainly, I mean, well, I suppose district governments, district municipalities are responsible for air pollution, etc., etc. But I find myself questioning whether climate sensitivity is a broad enough descriptor for that. So perhaps we can discuss that, and you can give me your thoughts on that. I realize climate is the hot button and the sexy nomenclature that's used at the moment, but I do think that bringing it to the ecosystem is a little bit closer to local government and where their responsibilities lie, which is really what you were talking to in your presentation. I am jumping around a little bit. I want to go back to the SOEs and specifically look at the SOEs that have big impact on the what I suppose they have a catalytic role in the economy. So guys like Transnet and Eskom are two SOEs that kind of possibly stand slightly apart from some of the rest, certainly in terms of the role that they play in terms of unlocking economic activities. So Transnet is currently seen as a blocker of the economy because of their rail constraints, and also, of course, not being able to get workers to their places of employment. And I just wanted to hear if you thought that perhaps things like Transnet and Eskom need to be handled a little bit differently from all of the other SOEs, and lumping all SOEs into one bracket. I'm not sure if that's helpful. I'd like to hear your opinions on that. I'm sorry if it's Makua or Makwa. I'm not sure what the pronunciation is, but you raised a very interesting question, but you did it very quickly. And I'd like you to unpack it a little bit more. And you spoke about the fact that the wealth spread, or the wealth distribution, if you like, has not been properly understood to date. And that brings the 75-25 revenue source split, which is mentioned in the white paper on local government. It brings it into question. I'd just like to hear, is the FFC included? Is it invited in the budget forum meetings? Now, the budget forum is a very specific body that's legislatively created in terms of the relevant act there. I was just wondering if the FFC has an opportunity to present to that and give you ideas, because I do think that SELGA, and certainly in this committee, we've consistently been raising concerns around division of revenue and of course the equitable share calculations and the need to review this. Now, SELGA, love them or hate them, is a different choice, but they often don't have the capacity to put together the type of a recommendation that I think the FFC has the capacity to put forward and actually make these compelling arguments in the budget forum. Unfortunately,
Honorable, I just sorry to disturb you. You must wrap up because the time is against us.
Yeah, Chair, it was a very long, involved presentation. I will wrap up. I've got two more questions. I'll trim it down to two. So I just want to know if you're included in the budget forum, because I think it's important that the more technical aspects get raised there, and I think that you are well placed to do that. The next thing that I picked up is that you have what to me is a new category of municipality. So you had A municipalities and you had B1, B2, B3, and B4. I'm not sure where you got those categories from. Is it a new classification I'm unaware of? The B1, B2, and B3. Where are those defined? If you can maybe help me with that. It's not something I've come across before. My last question is the most important one that I have, and it relates specifically to the margin squeeze that local municipalities are experiencing as a result of the and certainly this relates to some of the bigger municipalities more than some of the smaller ones, but the margin squeeze that they're experiencing as a result of NERSA allowing Eskom to pass higher annual increases to municipalities, bulk users, and to their direct suppliers, but allowing municipalities to increase their prices by a lower amount. What this is doing is it's squeezing the margin that is required for municipalities to fund their reticulation side of the business, and the fairly high thresholds there for attracting of qualified people to come and work there, but also to expand these networks, etc., etc. But also, I mean, traditionally we've also had a degree of cross-subsidization of services from the big bulks, being water and electricity, and the margins brought about by Eskom's increases is actually placing the financial model of municipalities under further and further risk. I haven't seen this highlighted anywhere. Have you got any thoughts on that? Chair, I have two more questions, which I will reserve and possibly find another way of getting them through. Thank you. Kau, I think that means you next.
Oh, thank
you
you.
very much, Honorable Ryder. Then I get Honorable Kuletsani.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to members. Good morning to everyone who's there. Let me first welcome the presentation, Chairperson. And then I've got only one clarity question to the presenter. On the slide 17, you mentioned that the government have paid 162 billion to financially distressed SOEs over the past 12 years, with Eskom receiving 82% of the total amount. Now, I just want to check with you, according to your assessment, is it a futile exercise that is done by the government? Does it really serve the purpose and bring improvement in the SOEs? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I also want to stand on the queue to say thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation. I also have the concern about 162 billion rand for the 12 years from Treasury for the SOEs, where Eskom get the big bite of the cake, while we're sitting also with other SOEs who also struggling on the issue of their operational, on the issue that they lost a lot of their infrastructure, on the issue of ventilation, and on the issue of stealing in all those funny things and damaging of infrastructure. So I would like to know the other 18%, who are those SMMEs who are receiving the 18%? Is the Transnet and also the other SOEs to fall under the SOEs. Because we cannot Eskom stack all the other government entities who fall under the SOEs, and they also only getting the benefit of the doubt. The only issue of the SRD's grants and the issue of the spending is Honorable Ryder already have alluded to. What makes it that they're underspending the grant, the SRD grants? Is it because of people of South Africa who are unemployed, who was be affected by the COVID-19, who was not properly informed about this grant? Is there any awareness programs to make sure those unemployment people can be informed because of awareness programs on this grant, because it don't only have to be budgeted for them, but they are not benefiting from this grant. And also I want to know how long will this grant be there? And if this grant will be there for another years, how long will it be? And if will the grants be increased? And for how long will they be there? Then on the issue of I welcome the issue of Chapter 3, the learner teacher support material and so forth and transport, because it is true that our rural people or our kids struggle to go into school or into school because of school transport, and also the issue of reading. I mean, it's very hurtful if you observe how that our kids struggle to read. Even they enter the universities, then they cannot even read. And the lecturers are struggling even with those kids who cannot even read at a higher education level. I welcome really that program. So on the last issue that I want to, on two last issues that I want to speak is on the infrastructure grant, the mixed fund. And mostly municipalities are spending the grant, private developers are developed. And according to my knowledge, this grant is for those at disadvantaged areas where they must put in infrastructure, but they're not doing so. Some of them, who are the small municipalities, they even use that grant for salaries because they cannot afford to pay even their own workers. So is there a monetary system who can monitoring that grant really carefully? Where I come from, the West Coast, that municipality is using the grant for the private investment for those people who come to develop the area, and they spend that grant on the infrastructure for those areas. And where our poor people staying, they are not even spending on the issue where there is not even lights, electricity infrastructure, and so forth and so forth. The last point I want to raise is on the issue of the LEDs. I agree. LEDs must also creating jobs and opportunities in relief poverty. But I don't see, I'm not saying all the municipalities. I'm talking where where we're doing oversight. Mostly of the LEDs are not have training programs and skills development programs on the issue of projects of businesses, of small businesses. That is a very issue that we must look very closely in. Thank you very much. Over to you, Doctor. Is there any other member who want to speak? Is there no other members?
Honorable my side, there is no member who has raised a hand thus far.
Yeah, so if there's no hand, then we hand over to Dr. and a team to respond on the inputs of the members and questions.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson, and to the honorable members for the questions and the deliberations thereof. Just going to maybe just touch on a few points, and then I'll ask the researchers to respond as well. Honorable Ryder, thank you so much for your responses. With regards to the actual document, we do have a printed document on our submission, and we also have a technical report as well, and we also have policy briefs on the various chapters, which are more succinct summaries for policy on the various chapters. So what we will do, we will compile those into a pack, and we will deliver those to you, to your parliamentary office via our parliamentary liaison. So you will get those documents. Thank you so much. With regards to
Sorry, Doctor, sorry to interrupt. I think that will help all the members in this select committee to receiving that document that Honorable Ryder was requesting to, so that they can inform all of us on one level. Thank you very much. If you can send it to the portfolio committee secretary, that everyone can receive that. Thank you very much.
That's fine. We can do that. Not a problem. Thank you so much, Honorable Member. We do agree, members, with regards to the implementation of the SRD, that there are challenges. I think the issues, we all agree that there are issues with regards to the accessing this SRD grant. And we think that implementation problems and implementation teething problems are an issue here. So when we think about a possibly basic income grant for the future subsequent to March 2024, because we must remember that the SRD grant, the SRD grant as we have it now, it's going to end after March 2024. There is still no clarity beyond that. Beyond that, we were expecting that there will be another.
You're going to turn left after open. You're going to turn left, and then when you come back, you'll exit on the other gate.
Doctor, is it you? Is it Doctor?
Thank you so much. I think there was just some feedback. Thank you so much. With regards to the Financial and Fiscal Commission being a member of the Budget Forum, indeed, we are a member of the Budget Forum, Honorable Ryder, in terms of the applicable legislation. Most of our analysis as the FFC and the deliberation thereof happens prior to the Budget Forum. There is another technical forum, is called the Technical Budget Forum. It's where our researchers and the researchers from the other entities, from your COCTA, National COCTA, SALGA, National Treasury, now they discuss the technicalities before it goes to the Budget Forum. Perhaps we can also ask for an audience where we can actually now present again to the Budget Forum, but most of the presentation from the FFC and the discussions of our recommendations happened at the Technical Budget Forum. By the time it gets to the political arena, which is the TBF, it has already been discussed at TBF, but we're not against us discussing it again, maybe summarizing it again at a technical budget forum. But we are a member. That's for sure, honorable member. I think I would like to give the opportunity to the researchers, to Thando and to Sianda, to maybe touch on the technical aspects of some of the questions which were asked by the members. Over to you, Thando and Sianda, for any inputs or thoughts on your side.
No, thanks, Chair. Maybe let me speak to some of the questions that have been raised. One question was on the underspending of the SRD grant. What we think, for instance, what could be the cause of the underspending. First of all, just to explain that it's a concern that this critical grant is underspending, given its intention, because it was intended to support those people that were affected by the COVID-19, people that are not in any form of employment. And if you if you listen to the presentation, we've analyzed and we've reached a conclusion that there is a huge demand for this grant, given its intended audience. But the fact that it is underspending means that then there is there is a problem of access with it. So and maybe it's also the administration of it that has to be improved. So we think that really people are not able to access it because of a number of factors. One of which is the fact that you have to have internet access to really access it, to make the application itself, and many people do not have internet access, especially in rural areas, and so if you don't have internet access, you might not be in a position then to access it. So and other administrative issues that are preventing people from accessing the fund. So we think that's where the challenge is with access to the grant. The other question that was raised was with regards to the SOEs. For instance, how should Transnet and Eskom be treated differently? It's important to note that Transnet and Eskom, of course, their role in economic growth and development cannot be underestimated. They play a key role, and therefore it might be necessary at some with regards to some aspects then to support them as for government to support them as much as they can, so that they don't fail because of their role in economic growth and development. So we think that the key issue for us is to strike a balance between their strategic importance and the need for transparency, accountability, and good governance. Is because from where we were sitting, we are worried that special treatment at times can undermine the principles of a fair competition, fiscal responsibility, and the efficient allocation of resources. What we mean is that they shouldn't be treated in a special way that undermine transparency and accountability. And in the presentation, we make the fact that even making special arrangements for them not to account or to fulfill some of the financial obligations that are legislated might increase the risk of them and not being able to adhere to good financial and governance principles. So yeah, while we see the need to support them differently, we're just emphasizing the importance of striking the balance when it comes to transparency and accountability and governance considerations. The other question that was raised, which is related to that one, was if the financial support that's going to SOEs, if it's a futile exercise for government to financially support SOEs. And we say no, it's not, because in the first instance they are created to, like I've already said, to for a well-defined strategic role in the economy. So they must be supported. The only challenge that we have is that it cannot be that they are supported financially and then they continue to fail, and then they continue to make losses, like we've demonstrated with both Eskom and Transnet, that they continue to make these losses, and they continue to exhibit failures when it comes to their operations as well. So financial support must go hand in hand with them taking the responsibility of being financially prudent, one, and two, being able to operate in a sustainable manner. So there must be accountability from their side as well, and government should, as a commission, we've made the point that any financial assistance that goes to them must be accompanied by conditions that ensure that there is a turnaround in terms of their finances and also their operations. Chairperson, I think those are the key issues or questions that I wanted to speak to, and then other colleagues can come in and speak to the others. Thanks.
Not sure if Sianda, you have any comments or not. If not, it's fine.
No, I don't have any comments. I'm sure Khutso will deal with issues that are related to the municipalities. But except to echo the point that Thando is making, that the over-reliance of SOEs on bailouts causes significant fiscal risk for the country. And as in the instance of Eskom, where the government had to even take up some of their debt, it then increases our debt to GDP ratio and also affect our debt servicing costs. And that could result in some, fiscal sustainability issues or concerns that may arise. But that is all, Chair, that I can say for now. I'm sure Khutso will talk about the categorization of municipalities and the other issues that were raised relating to municipalities.
No, thank you so much, Sianda. Khutso, your thoughts on these matters?
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for the questions, honorable members. Honorable Ryder, the questions on the categorization of municipalities. Yes, in terms of the Bs, the B1s, as we know it, refer to the secondary cities, which is bigger local municipalities, and the B2s, those are our large towns. And then the B3s refer to smaller municipalities, and the B4s our rural municipalities. And this is in terms of the Municipal Demarcation Board's categorization of municipalities. The question regarding the 75-25% split, the main question around this the split is whether this assumption still holds in this time and age. And while it may hold for metros and to some extent our secondary cities, the situation we find that is different for smaller and more rural municipalities, as their revenue base is very thin and to a very large extent limited. And
it's
while
12
bigger... Okay. Sorry about that. And also, the bigger municipalities collect revenue from all four trading services, but rural municipalities are characterized, as we know it, by high levels of unemployment, of poverty, and also, and as such, many people cannot afford these services. And this is why there's been calls for the assumptions of the white paper on local government to be reviewed. And secondly, the issue on the margin squeeze and the NESA tariff. As we know it, the current economic climate, which is characterized by inflation and high interest rates and consequently high employment, this tariff hike may then prove to be counterproductive and to some extent may harm revenue collection by municipalities. And this is mentioned in the presentation where we talk about what the impact of high municipal tariffs can be to municipalities. This is also coupled with the impact of load shedding and the solar panel incentives by National Treasury, which may impact very negatively on municipal revenue and the ability of municipalities to cross-subsidize poor households with electricity. Yes, and this is because many people will be leaving the grid, and therefore the revenue base of municipalities is most likely to decrease because of the hike in the tariff and other issues that I've just mentioned right now. Yes, those are the two questions, Chair, from Honorable Ryder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kutso. Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson. I think those are the questions we're able to answer. If there are any further questions, we can also answer those in writing to yourselves. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Doctor, and your team. I really appreciate what you was presenting today in the engagement. And I hope you well. Thank you very much for them. You have excused. You will be excused because we deal still with the other matter on the minute.
Thank you, ma'am.
You can be excused, yeah. Okay. Nopala.
Yes, Chairperson.
Nopala, can we dealing with the minutes of
Yes, Chair, we have 2 sets of minutes, Chairperson. I am ready to proceed. I'll take your directive, Chair.
You can proceed with the minutes.
That's the first set of minutes, Chairperson, dated 20 September 2023. Over to you, Chair.
Honorable members, there's the minutes. Can I get a proposal for the adoption of the minutes? Is there any corrections? Honorable members? Pardon?
I move to adopt the minutes.
There is a proposal to adopt the minutes. Is there a seconder? Is there a seconder?
Yes, Chair, I second.
Oh, agreed to be adopted. The first minutes, can we get the second minutes?
Thank you, Chairperson. The second set of minutes dated 27 September 2023. That's the first page. Attendance register. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8, which is the last page. Over to you, Chair.
Members, there is the second minutes. Can we get a proposal of the adoption of the minutes?
I move to adopt the minutes.
There is a proposal of Honorable Ryder to accept the minutes. There's second.
Chairperson. Lamarhan second.
You second, okay. So
Honourable
the minutes.
Chairperson, just to correct you, it's Honourable Oakham that proposed, not Ryder.
Can you come again?
I just want to
Can you
correct
come
you.
again?
It's Honourable Oakham that proposed, not Honourable Ryder.
Okay, sorry. Your voices are so more or less the same.
Because we are equally brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Honorable Oakham support it, and Honorable Marhane second it. So the minutes be adopted.
Honorable Mamarhan second.
If there's nothing else, yes, I did say that. Is there any member who? No, is there any item maybe that of anything you want to say, Honorable Nobala?
No, Chairperson. This is the last item, Chairperson. You may close your meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, very much, Nobala, for everything that you've done for today and always. And thank you very much, honorable members, for attending the meeting and doing your work that you're supposed to do as the honorable members of the NCOP. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. We see one another at 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Even though I struggled, but we'll talk.
Yes, I can see. Yes, the network is very bad also in Acacia Park. Yeah.
No, okay. No, it's fine. Thanks.
See you. Bye.